Good morning, I'm Juanita and welcome back to the Knit Guru. Today's video is a very special requested video, and so I think I've gone one step further than the request, hopefully. This is the 1 hour beanie, and as the title suggests, it can be made in an hour, but there is a caveat on that. In order to make this 1 hour beanie in an hour, you are going to need to be quite an experienced knitter. Yeah, but for anybody else, you can probably make it in a day. It's a great beginner beanie. Now, this is one of the most popular patterns that I've got on my website. And you'll see that the pictures for that popular one are a mustard yellow and a tan. I've remade it in these grey and black colours, and the stripes are completely optional, but I've put the stripes in mainly so that people can see the differences in the stitches. This grey here is in the decreasing, this black is just knitted and purled in alternate rows, and this bit here is just the 1x1 ribbing. I've also made this version flat for those of you who aren't yet confident to knit in the round. This is a much faster knit in the round because you don't have to know how to purl. But it's the same process once you start knitting, either way. So the 1 hour beanie, this is the medium size of the 1 hour beanie, and it fits an adult head. Now my head is not particularly large. I thought it was a large head, but it turns out it's not particularly large. But there is a size up on this and there is a size down on this. I do get requests quite frequently to have this as a child size beanie, and I'd say if you want to make this for a child, just make the smallest size, which is 4 stitches less than this. Children's heads aren't actually that much smaller than adult heads. It's just the way we're built, you know. But also, I'm not sure if I like massively chunky things on small children. So there's that element to it as well. What you're going to need is, I think it's called super chunky yarn. I'll show you which one I'm using for this particular project. But the Lion Brand Thick and Quick, I think it's called, is what's used in the last written version, and this one here is just a super chunky yarn. The easiest thing to look for is when you're on the back, you want the recommended needle size to be 9mm. Now this is made using a 9mm needle. I made it with circular needles, but I knit it flat, mainly because I've gotten too old and my wrists can't handle straight needles. So without further ado, let's get into this tutorial and what it will look like when it's unfolded. We've got the ribbing, we've got a seam down the back, which, you know, you might do a better job at sewing up your seam than I do. You've got your ugly sides on the inside. Yeah, and that's it. That's going to be our 1 hour beanie. The written pattern is down below, and I'll include the written pattern for a circular version as well as a knitted flat version. And again, your colour changes are completely optional and up to you. Mostly I figure I'm going to give this hat away, but there's no way I'm making a tutorial knitting in all black yarn. It would be just terrible for everybody involved. So this is grey and black because that would be the secondary favourite colours of the people that, the person that I'm giving this to. Anyway, let's get to the tutorial. Right, so I'm using this super chunky yarn here. It's just an acrylic. The pattern that's written recommends the Lion Brand Hometown or something similar. You're going to need 9mm needles, and your yarn should also say requiring 9mm needles. These ones here are just circulars, but we're not going to be knitting circular for this tutorial. We're going to be knitting flat. Now, hopefully, there's the cat. Hopefully, what we're going to have is a really basic tutorial, so feel free to skim ahead or slow down and pause depending on where you're up to. I'm doing 2 colours, but the colours changes are optional. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cast on some stitches. Here we go. I'm making a little slip knot. There we go. I'm trying to do this slowly for those of you that are doing this for the first time. So once you've got your slip knot, what you want is to be able to just slide your needle into that little hole and then pull on the shorter of the yarn tails. Now we're going to use the other side as our working yarn, and we're going to cast on stitches. There are 3 sizes to this hat. I'm making the middle size here, which is 44 stitches, but you can either do 40, 44 or 48 stitches. I find that when working with a circular needle, it's great because you get this cable completely in the way 100% of the time. You can't just do it with straight needles. So this is the cable cast on method that I use. So I pretty much use the cable cast on method for pretty much everything. Okay, so we're going to go in through both sides of the stitch here, around our needle, and pull the yarn through. Then we're just going to take that stitch we've created and put it on the left hand side. I'll show that again how I do it. So we're going in through under the stitch, so we're going right through both sides. Then we're going to go around the needle that we've just put through. Then we're going to pick that yarn up and pull it through that gap with our right hand needle. This is going to come off a lot of the time because I'm not very coordinated, let's be honest. Right, so we're just going to slide it on the top. It turns out I'm also not very coordinated when I'm trying to be coordinated. So we go through, around, then we're going to pull the yarn through the gap, and then we're going to put it on to the other needle. Look at that. Now we're going to do this until we've got 40, 44 or 48 stitches. I'm going for 44 stitches. I will link some tutorials down below because there are some YouTube channels that do things really, really well and in a way that makes more sense than me. Because let's face it, my specialty is unhinged rather than quality content. So Kristen from Studio Knit has some really fantastic, very beginner basic tutorials of how to do all these things, and her aesthetics are just sublime, and she talks quietly, and she's just lovely. I don't know her personally, but I've been following her for years. So we're just going to go until we've got 44 stitches. Now here we're on to our first row. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a 1 by 1 rib, which means we're going to knit the first stitch, which here we go, knitting the first stitch. So we go through that stitch itself, and now we're wrapping the yarn around, pulling it through the needle and then off. So in, around, through, off is how my mother always taught me. Then we're going around the needle, and then we're going to go into the gap the other way for a purl stitch. And we're going to wrap our yarn as we show there, and then come through the other way. Now I'm an English style knitter rather than a continental style knitter. I would like to learn continental style knitting, but I feel like maybe I'm too old and set in my ways to learn a new technique. So this rib stitch here, the main thing to remember is to keep moving your yarn between those needles between each stitch, because otherwise you're going to end up with like little diagonal stitches going across the top. You'll recognize them after some time, but in early knitting it's kind of easy to make that mistake, and you see it as another stitch, and next thing you know your knitting's growing wider and wider. So we're just going to try and go, and this is a knit stitch, we're going through, we're going around the back needle, and then we're going to come through the gap, and we're going to pull it off the needle. Then we bring the yarn in the front, we're going to go into the side of the stitch there, we're going to go around the needle, which is now on the top, and we're going to pull it through and slide that old stitch off. We're just going to keep doing that all the way across the row. Doing this rib stitch is going to take you the longest time of the whole hat, because the ribbing, particularly when you're trying to do an easy knit for the first time, basically you're doing a lot. You're doing a different stitch every single time. You're rearranging your yarn on either side of the work. But as you'll see there, it's growing really quickly with just this big needle and big yarn size. So when we've finished our row, what we're going to do is we're going to turn our work around so that now we've got all the stitches sitting on the left hand side, and we've got no stitches on the right hand side. So where you see these bobbles in the front, those are going to be purl stitches on this row. And the ones where you don't have the bobbles are going to be knit stitches. So we're going to knit this first one. Here we go, knitting the first one. Then we're going to bring the wool around, and we're going to purl the second one. Then we're going to knit the third one. Then we're going to bring our yarn forward, and we're going to purl the next one. And what you'll start seeing is the pattern of this rib forming on your needles. So you'll start seeing that at the moment, this is really easy to count our work because we can see what the stitch is supposed to be. We can count those bobbles of the purl stitches that are the ones that are the bobble facing us. And we can see how long our rib is getting. But it is definitely the longest part of the whole process is knitting the rib. You could do this as a 2x2 rib, which is perfectly acceptable, but I find that the 1x1 rib pulls things in quite nicely. It's sort of a more stretchy. Yeah, stretchy is a good word for it. So here we are here. We've finished 2 rows now, and we're on to our third, so you can see the pattern forming there. So we're just going to keep going up here with our ribbing. So we're either going to do 12, 14 or 16 rows of ribbing, depending on what size you want. Now this ribbing will pull things in around the forage or around the band of the hat. So here we go again. We're going to do another little demonstration, but not so many anymore. Yeah, you see, this is me just slipping up because I'm trying to be cocky about the fact that I can do a purl and a knit and a purl and a knit. There we go, there's a knit. There's a purl. Of course, we're not even showing you. See, Kirsten from Studio Knit, she's not going to make this mistake and show you a tutorial where things are half off the edge. Honestly, she's so good if you're trying to learn something new. I just find you're a calming voice in the crowd of the internet. I don't think anyone's referred to me as a calming voice. Not once in my entire life, to be completely honest with you. So here we go with our ribbing. And we're going to just abandon this showing you every stitch for a while because I think you've got it. So we're just going to go until we've got the right number of rows. So if you count the bobbles of your purls, you'll be able to see. So when the stitches pull in, you'll see that it looks like it's almost straight knit stitching because those purl stitches naturally want to slide backwards. But if we stretch it out just a little bit with our hands or our fingers without knocking them off the needles, because that's enough to make you cry at some points when you're still just learning, what you'll see is that the purl stitches are there. There we go. I knew I did that. And then the knit stitches will just pull things in tightly again. So that gives us the stretch, which makes the hat stay on our head rather than just want to come flying off. So here we go. We're nearly there, and we're aiming to get either our 12, 14 or 16 rows of rib. There we go. So it's the same on both sides. It's a reversible part of the pattern. From every point on here, it's not going to be reversible. I'm going to change colours. You do not have to change colours. I'm changing colours so that the person I'm making this hat can have a black hat, or at least a mostly black hat. Everything we're going to do now, I've got a pair of scissors and we're going to cut the yarn. Always exciting trying to cut the yarn with my left hand so that I can film it with my right hand. You would think that I would just get a better tripod, and I've got a better tripod, but it's in the container, and until the house is finished, this is what we're dealing with. Okay, so now we're going to take our black yarn or our different colour yarn, and we're just going to hold our yarn tails. You're just going to try and not deal with the grey. You're going to end up with what feels like a very sloppy stitch to start with. We're just going to knit right across with the black yarn as though it's the grey yarn. You will need to leave a yarn tail of grey hanging out there. Make it longer than you think you're going to need, because we will use that yarn tail for stitching up our hat later. So we're just going to knit all the way across in this black yarn. What you'll see when we're doing this colour change is that you'll end up with what's called a good side and a bad side. It doesn't mean that one side's diverted to the course of evil, more that we've got one side where we're going to see a row of black and grey wobbles, and one side that's going to be nice and neat and clean. So the more we look at it here, there we go, we're getting across the row. I'm trying to do this nice and slowly for you so that, you can see. So when we turn around, you're going to see we've got this row of grey purl bobbles, and we've got the black bobbles underneath it. Sometimes you'll find a pattern where this says, to do it because it's a bit of an effect that it's creating, but what we're looking for here is not having that effect. We just want the colour change on the front. Now on these rows here, the bad sides, we're just going to purl all the way across. So we're going to go in the hole of the stitch directly, around the needle and pull it through. So we're just going to go in this front hole, around the needle, pull the right needle through and slide the left stitch off. And we're just going to continue purling all the way across these rows. So we're going to have alternating rows of knit and purl. When we have alternating rows of knit and purl, this is called stockinette stitch. Now the colour change here is completely optional. You do not have to do a colour change in your hat. In fact, if you want to make this the easiest hat you've ever made, you're not going to do a colour change at all. You're going to do the whole thing in one ball of yarn. Now, one ball of yarn should be enough to make this hat. Not sure whether, depending on the size of the ball of yarn you've got, you might not be able to quite get the whole of the largest size in one ball of yarn, but you might. It's going to depend on the size of the yarn that you've got and what the meterage is. But if you're doing a colour change hat, you'll definitely get an entire hat out of the two balls. And of the two smaller sizes, you're definitely going to be able to just do one ball. So now we're back on the good side. The side that's chosen righteousness. No, it's not done any of those things. It's just the side that doesn't have the bobbles. And we're going to knit. So we're going to keep doing this for, well, basically as long as we want. I'm aiming to do this for around about 20 to 22 to 24 rows, depending on what size you want to make. So there we go. You'll be able to see that we've got some neat stitches coming through there. We don't have any bobbles. We don't have any purls. And then we'll get through there. Look at that go. Aren't we great? So, the next hardest part is going to be when we finish doing our rows of just our colour change or our stockinette. When we get past this bit here, we're going to start decreasing for the top of the hat, because as you know, your head is round. Unless, of course, you happen to be Frankenstein's monster and you are sitting here wanting to make yourself a hat, in which case, if you are Frankenstein's monster, you are probably going to want to make the largest size, and you won't have to worry too much about the round shaping at the top of this project. However, we're going to change yarn back to the grey. The main reason we're changing back to the grey is because actually seeing stitch definition in black on a video, terrible idea. Like, who on earth invented black yarn? Have you ever tried to crochet with black yarn? Oh, it's the absolute worst. Knitting with black yarn, absolute worst, because you need so much light to be able to see what you're doing. And the older you get, the more you complain about dark yarns, I tell you. I actually do the same complaint about white yarns, because I find they get a little bit too light reflective. Anyway, so we're going to cut off that black yarn now that we've got enough rows. Now we're going to start shaping the crown. So the first thing we're going to do is the same sort of colour change that we did before. We've cut off our black yarn, we're holding our grey yarn tight, and we're using our grey yarn as though it's our working yarn. So just off shot is what we're going to do here. And we're going to, there we go, we're going to attempt to knit. We're going to attempt to knit, but we're going to get the cable in the way, because that's what happens. So we're knitting some stitches. Hopefully we're all still having a lovely day while we're doing this. So what we're going to do to start with is we're just going to do our colour changes. So to do our colour change, we're just going to do a nice row of grey in knit, and then we're going to turn around and we're going to do a nice row of the grey in purl on the other side. So there's our row of grey completed on the knit side. We're going to turn around and we're going to see that on the bad side, I'm not even going to say about choosing evil, the bad side that woke up and chose violence. So there we go, we've got the bad side with our bobbles, and we're going to do a purl row all the way across. All this is just doing is so that when we start decreasing, all of our decreased stitches which lean over are going to be in the grey. Again, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to do the colour change. The colour change is completely up to you. You can colour change every couple of rows if you want, but you don't have to. So we're just going to purl across this row. It's going to be fun and exciting, and clearly I've forgotten how to knit or do a voiceover at this point. If you're still following along at this point, good for you. Thank you so much. You're a legend. like, comment, subscribe. I think I'm supposed to say that. Anyway, we're going to start decreasing at this point. So what we're going to do to start with is that we're going to knit 2 stitches here. We're going to slide things along a bit. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take these 2 stitches and we're going to knit them together. So that's going to mean that we're going to be decreasing a stitch there. So we've taken 2 stitches and we've turned it into 1 stitch. So we're going to knit 2 more stitches just regular. And now we're going to knit 2 stitches together. So we're going to take these 2, we're going to pass the needle through them both, and we're going to knit them at the same time and pull it through. Right. We're going to do this across the entire row. So that's going to decrease our stitches quite significantly. So we're going to knit 2, and then we're going to knit 2 together. If you heard a beep, that is my sister. And she is trying to find out if I would like to get tickets to go and see Lewis Capaldi. Yes, I would love to get tickets to go and see Lewis Capaldi. However, tickets to Lewis Capaldi are going to be on a Tuesday. And I'd have to catch a flight to get there. I work on Tuesdays. And I work on Wednesdays. Anyway, so we've now purled the row, and now we're on our next decreasing row. Now we're going to knit 1, and then we're going to knit 2 together all the way across the row. So there we go, we're going to knit 2 together. So we're going to knit 1, and then we're going to knit 2 together. And what I was trying to show you with my thumb just there is that you'll start seeing that there's a leaning point in our knitting. You're going to see a line forming with these decreases. So as we're taking these 2 stitches to knit together, and we're going to wrap the yarn around the back there, and we're going to pull it through, what we're going to start seeing is that we've got this lean going on the stitches. You'll see this line of our stitches being knitted together. It's going to start pulling it together at the crown of our hat. We're going to purl the next row, and you'll see that everything's starting to bunch up quite a bit at this point. This next row is quite similar to what we've been doing. We're going to continue with knitting 2 together, but we're going to knit 2 together across the whole row this time. So we're going to slide our stitches down. It's going to be quite a lot in our handful, to be completely honest with you. So we're going to knit 2 together all the way across this row. So there we go. We're zooming across. We're zooming. There's so few stitches left at this point. It's kind of ridiculous. We've come so far. And you can see why this is a really quick project and why I call it the 1 Hour Beanie. Because we're not dealing with too many stitches to start with. We're not dealing with too many rows. And the decreases happen so very, very quickly. The part that's going to take you the longest in this entire process is going to be, well, other than the casting on and the rib, because if you are new to knitting, those do take a while, is going to be the seaming it up at the other side. If you're ready to do circular, or if you've been doing circular knitting, there's a circular tutorial down below. And the pattern's very similar. There's just no purl rows. They're all knit. So there we go. We're going to drop everything because that's what we do. So we've got this row where everything's pulling in. We've got these angles from our decreasing. And now what we're going to do is we are going to just have a closer look at our stitches. We're going to do another lot of knitting 2 together all the way across because we've done a purl row. And now we're going to knit 2 across this entire row. This is going to be our last row. And we're done. Well, other than the stitching up and the cutting and the binding and the wrapping and the, oh, did you make this? Oh, what a nice hat. Oh, thank you so much. That is so appreciated, is what I'm assuming happens when people get given a hat. Yeah, it's usually what happens, let's be honest. I feel the need to have a cough. I'm dying. I'm not really dying. It's just been really difficult to get over COVID and the flu this winter, I tell you. I should have been wearing more of these beanies. I'm hilarious. Now, you may notice at this point we're stuck with just 1 stitch at the end that we can't knit 2 together. There's nothing to knit it 2 together with. Just knit that 1 stitch. It's just a single Pringle. It's fine. It's fine. Now, we're going to leave a long yarn tail because we're going to use this yarn tail to darn things together. And we're going to cut our yarn. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take a needle. I'm using this plastic needle here because the plastic needles have these really large holes in the end. We're going to thread our plastic needle and we're going to attempt to thread it on camera like a professional would. And then we're going to thread our needle through our remaining stitches. Let's see if we can adjust it so that we can see it more clearly, because the cable, yet again, is going to get in the way. But knitting on straight needles with heavy yarn, it's very heavy and it's hard on my wrists, and I've had too many wrist injuries of late. So we're just threading these remaining stitches onto our needle, because we're going to thread our working yarn through and we're going to pull it tight. We're going to even demonstrate it again. I'm not sure why I'm deciding to demonstrate it again, but, you know, I guess why not? So there we go. We are zooming through with our stitches and our needle, and we're just going to pull that all the way through. So now we're going to pull that real tight, and we're going to fold our hat in half. So when we fold our hat in half, we're going to use this yarn tail to stitch up our hat. Clearly, if we've got one colour of hat, we can just use the one yarn tail and whip right down that side. We're going to whip stitch. You can do a mattress stitch, but mattress stitch, well, it's a hat. You know, you don't have to learn a new stitch. You can just whack this thing together. We're just going to stitch down this side here. What I'm doing is I'm going to then darn in my ends. Now, the way that I darn in my ends is probably wrong, but I'm going to go across this row of purl stitches where the two colours join, and I'm just hooking through those purl stitches from that join in the grey. I'm just going to slide my needle through that gap there. We're going to see it, but we're not worried about it. Then I'm just going to come back through the next row of grey purl stitches just down below, and we're just going to come back through a couple of stitches. I'm going to have to rethread my needle at this point, because this always happens to me. You can choose to just weave in that entire yarn end that you've got, or you can just weave it through and then trim it off with a pair of scissors so that it sits nice and flat. It's not going to come undone. If you've used a wool yarn, this is going to felt itself together quite neatly. You can use a little needle and stab it a few times if you're worried about it, or you can just leave it. I find that it's just going to be fine. Now we're going to take our black section here, we're going to stitch together the black section, and we're going to stitch together the grey section with the other yarn ends. So what I am going to do at this point, though, is I'm going to tie a knot where our colours join. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't want my knitting to come undone. If you're a new knitter and you're worried about your yarn ends coming undone, or you're worried that you're not going to darn them in properly and you don't want everything to come apart, just tie these knots together, these ends together with a knot. Nice and tight, and it's not going to go anywhere. Now we're just going to darn them in and darn up sew up the side of our stitches just by picking up a stitch on either side of the hat. And now I'm just going to, as the stitch describes, whip it through. So I'm just going to go in one side and out the other. Using these bobbles of the stitches as they turn is kind of a handy way of starting. There we go, we're just going in one side, through the other side, and then just pull it. There we go. Not rocket science. Are these the neatest stitches in the world? No. But once we've done that, we're just going to fold this brim of our hat up, just like that, and then we're going to look at it and we're going to marvel at our achievements, because we made the 1 hour beanie. Yes, we're awesome. So hopefully that worked out for you. This bit here is just at the end so that you can see the finished beanie yet again, and so that the last little bit of the video isn't covering anything that matters. So I will give you a shot of where our house construction is currently up to, and I will see you next week. Bye.